Hello, Pink Collective, and welcome to Pink After Dark. Tonight's tales blur the line between true and fictional, so get comfortable, turn down the lights, and let's begin. The true tale of Strands, the tragic love story of Rapunzel, was known throughout the kingdom, though the king and queen still mourned their son's untimely death. On that fateful night when the prince had gone to rescue his beloved, he had been drawn to the isolated tower by Rapunzel's enchanting song drifting through the forest. The impossibly tall structure stood alone, its smooth stone walls offering no doors or footholds, only a single window at the very top where Rapunzel would sit, her golden hair cascading down like liquid sunlight. Their love had blossomed during his daily visits. Rapunzel had explained her captivity under the cruel witch she called Mother. Establishing their signal system, a blanket hung from the window meant it was safe to approach. The prince would call out those now famous words with longing in his voice. "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, my love, let down your hair." Her magnificent golden braid would come tumbling down, so impossibly long that its ends pooled on the ground in perfect coils, forming natural loops for climbing. Their carefully planned escape had seemed foolproof. The prince would bring proper rope on a night when the witch was known to be away. But when he made that final climb, his strong hands gripping the familiar golden strands, he found not his beloved's smiling face, but the witch's sneering visage, holding Rapunzel's severed braid like a trophy. Her powerful push sent him plummeting backward into the night. In her overwhelming grief, Rapunzel had attacked her mother with desperate fury, and both had fallen to their deaths beside the broken prince. After their bodies were discovered, the tower stood abandoned yet never quiet. Villagers would leave fresh flowers where the lovers lay, the petals wilting within hours as if the very ground rejected their tribute. The previously hidden door, once concealed behind strategically placed rocks and reinforced boards, now stood broken open, its splintered wood bearing claw-like marks no human could have made. Local teens dared each other to enter after dark, their bravado crumbling as they crossed the threshold. They spread increasingly elaborate stories of Rapunzel's ghost still letting down her spectral hair at midnight, of the witch's shadow seen pacing behind the high window, of faint singing that turned to screams when listeners approached. Some claimed the prince's ghost could be seen kneeling beneath the tower, forever mourning his lost love. On a chilly autumn evening when the moon hung heavy and orange, 6 friends approached the tower with nervous laughter. Emily and Rose lingered outside, their arms crossed tightly against the cold, jumping at every rustle in the dark woods surrounding the clearing. When a blood-curdling scream echoed from within the stone walls, they hesitated only a moment before rushing inside, their friendship overriding their fear. The ancient spiral staircase wound up the tower's inner wall, each stone step worn smooth by centuries of use. Moonlight streamed through the high window, illuminating swirling dust motes that danced like spirits in the stale air. At the top, they found their friends in surprisingly good spirits, Jack and Eric dramatically reenacting the fatal fall with exaggerated gestures, while John teased a visibly uncomfortable Mary with the mummified birds he'd discovered in the rafters. The circular chamber held only sparse furnishings, a canopy bed with rotting velvet curtains, an ornate dresser cluttered with feminine objects, and a large wooden chest banded with iron. Every surface lay buried under a thick layer of dust that rose in plumes with each footstep. But more disturbing were the strands, not cobwebs as one might expect, but long, silken strands of golden hair draped over every surface, coiled around bedposts and woven through the chest's hinges as if Rapunzel's ghost had brushed her locks throughout the room for decades. Mary approached the dresser with hesitant curiosity, her fingers hovering over the time-frozen objects, tarnished silver hairbrushes with strands still caught in their bristles, ribbons faded from vibrant gold to sickly yellow. Crystal perfume bottles coated in grime that couldn't quite conceal their once luxurious contents. The oval mirror above the dresser was so clouded with age, it barely reflected anything except in one lower corner where several bottles sat suspiciously clean, as if recently handled. As Mary lifted one bottle, its glass strangely warm to the touch, she uncovered words crudely carved into the wood beneath. Mary called everyone over. She moved all the bottles aside to reveal all the words and read them aloud. "Within every strand my spirit will lay. I will slay anyone in my way." A sudden gust howled through the window opening, extinguishing all their candles at once. In the sudden moonlight, Mary's scream pierced the darkness as she saw movement in the mirror, not her own reflection, but a girl's gaunt face with hollow eyes and matted hair peering from behind the dresser, her cracked lips mouthing the carved words. In their frantic escape down the crumbling stairs, they all came out the tower laughing, thinking how they all were scared by a well-timed gust of wind. However, Mary didn't share their laughter. Emily and Rose laughed anxiously. They felt the sudden wind carried evil with it. The 6 friends split up once they got to their village and went home. Eric and Jack walked together as they lived in the same road. Eric took something out of his pocket to show Jack. He had snatched up a braided lock of hair that gleamed unnaturally in the moonlight from the tower. He didn't want to show it in front of the girls since they seemed unsettled by the place. He wants to give it to his little sister since she thinks Rapunzel's hair was magic and she adored fairy tales. Jack asked for a few strands. His brothers didn't see the story as a fairy tale but as a horror story, and he's sure the hair will scare them. That night Eric placed it carefully under his pillow, smiling at the thought of his sister's delight. However, that morning his sister wouldn't smile. Their father found Eric dead in his bed, eyes frozen open in terror, lips turned blue, and faint red marks circling his throat like invisible fingers had squeezed the life from him. At the somber funeral, Jack confessed through tears that they'd taken souvenirs from the tower. He produced from his pocket the few strands he'd kept, now seeming to pulse faintly in his trembling hand. That evening, overcome with dread, he threw the hairs into his family's roaring fireplace, sighing in relief as they blackened and curled until he felt a tingling in his palm. Before his horrified eyes, golden strands sprouted from his own skin, winding around his wrist with deliberate motion, then coiling up his arm toward his throat. His parents burst in to find him clawing at his neck, his screams muffled by the living hair that tightened with every gasp, until finally he lay still. Emily, working the evening shift at her family's tavern, overheard 2 elderly travelers whispering urgently in a shadowed corner. One gnarled hand slammed a tankard down as a raspy voice insisted, "It can't be her, she was trapped in that tower." The other man replied in tones of dread, then explained the marks on the boy's neck, just like the miller's son 60 years back. Just then Mary, Rose and John came storming into the tavern and told Emily the terrible news of Jack. They all rushed to his house to find his inconsolable mother outside and his father telling his neighbors he was sure he saw hair around his throat, but now there was nothing, and the coroner also couldn't explain how it looked like Jack was strangled, but he couldn't see with what, same with Eric. The next day, the surviving friends Emily, Rose, Mary, and John tracked down the travelers at the village inn. The older of the 2, a leathery-skinned merchant missing 2 fingers on his left hand, revealed fragments of a forgotten legend, a beautiful woman who would appear at harvest festivals, her impossibly long hair braided with flowers. Men would follow her into the woods, only to be found days later with their faces frozen in terror, their throats encircled by golden strands embedded in their flesh. The friends felt frustrated. The tale of the beautiful woman couldn't have been Rapunzel. She was still very young when she died, as well as the merchant's legend happened 60 years ago. Defeated, they all head back to their homes. They hoped since only Eric and Jack had taken hair, that is why they died, and the others should be safe. That night, as Mary was getting ready for bed, brushing her hair, pacing around in her room, as she passed by her mirror, something caught her eye. She slowly walked to the mirror, and when she looked back at her reflection, she wasn't the only one looking back at her. Behind her stood the girl she saw behind the dresser in the tower. She yelped and spun around to see no one there. Mary turned back to the mirror to see her again. She looked filthy and her hair was long and dirty. Half of it covered her face. She gave a half smile. Mary turned around again to see no one there. She turned to the mirror, and this time the girl had a thick strand of dirty hair in her hands over Mary's head. Before Mary could react, the girl brought down her hands, pulled the hair tight around her neck, and started strangling her. Mary tugged at her neck, not able to grab the hair she could feel around her neck. She could feel her feet lifting from the floor. She kicked at her dresser while struggling, but she couldn't do anything to stop her. Mary felt her limbs go limp. She had no more strength in her hands, and she could feel herself slipping away when she suddenly fell to the floor. Her heart was beating in her ears, and as the beating subsided, she started to hear the sound of shrill screams. She could see the girl physically, and not just in the mirror. She was screaming and holding herself as flames consumed her until the flames burned out and she disappeared. Emily and Rose came climbing through the window. Mary only noticed when they were beside her and asking if she was okay. Emily found the piece of hair Eric had at his house. She took it before his sister might get it, and when they went to Mary and saw her hanging in the air struggling, Emily moved on instinct, pulled out the piece of hair she got from Eric's house, and held the hair to the flame of the lantern she used to see at night. When the hair went up in flames, that's when she became visible for Emily and Rose to see. Mary was still trying to make sense of what was going on, as Emily and Rose led her to the window and helped her through it. On the outside, John came running towards them after speaking to merchants again. Guided by the merchants' directions, they found a crumbling cottage nearly swallowed by the forest, its thatch roof caved in and walls bowed with age. They all looked around the cabin for anything they could find. Rose stepped on a floorboard that lifted at one end. At first, she didn't think anything of it. The floor would have started to rot, but she decided to try lifting it up, and underneath she saw a trunk covered in dust, dirt, and the bottom had moss growing along the sides. She called over the others, who helped her pull up more boards so they could get the trunk out. In the trunk were a lot of clothing items, such as hats, coats, and vests, as well as pipes and tobacco pouches. All the items looked like they would belong to men. It didn't look like one man since the coats and vests were different sizes. They looked through the trunk, speculating if the items belonged to her father. Mary held up a coat that had initials embroidered on the pocket. A.D. Edward Thomas. An ancient woman voice emerged like a shadow, her milky eyes seeing more than they should. She spoke of a healer who had lived in that cottage, who had taken in an orphaned girl, only to discover years later the child's terrible secret, how her hair grew with each life taken, how she lured men with song only to drain their vitality. Edward Thomas was her fiancé, and she had seen his murder by the hands of the girl with the long hair. The tower had been her prison, the mother actually her jailer. The carved words were no mere threat, but a spell binding her power to the Strands. Armed with this knowledge, they returned to the tower at dusk, their lanterns casting long shadows on the stone. As flames took hold of the dry timbers, the tower seemed to scream not with the crackle of fire, but with a human voice. Hair like liquid gold poured from the high window, snatching at 4 young teens. They were able to keep the hair at bay with torches, but one strand slipped by grabbing Mary and dragging her up the burning walls. Inside the smoke-choked upper chamber, the very stones seemed to bleed strands that coiled around her limbs and throat. John ran to the door and jumped over a row of flames, dodging flames coming from vines that grew all along the walls. He ran up the stairs, and on the top floor was a black figure that looked like a silhouette of a woman surrounded by hair. Mary was held in the air. John tried running to her, but he was grabbed too. They could feel the hair tightening around their necks, and breathing started to become hard. Mary suddenly fell on the dresser. She was coughing, trying to catch her breath and not inhale smoke from the fire when she saw Emily and Rose in the room trying to fight off the mass of hair. Mary sat herself up, and under her fingertips, she felt the indents of the scratches on the dresser. Mary looked down and saw it's the words she read when they came to the tower the first time. Within every strand my spirit will lay, I will slay anyone in my way. Mary heard the screams of Emily and Rose, who were now also being hoisted in the air. Mary scrambled to get off the dresser and look for something sharp. She saw the dresser mirror was broken. It must have happened when she fell on the dresser. She grabbed a piece of mirror and started scratching out the words on the dresser. Emily, Rose, and John immediately fell to the floor. The black mass of hair turned towards Mary and lunged at her. Rose ran around the mass of hair to the dresser and continued to scrape at the carved words as the fire spread, the letters fighting to reform under her fingers. As the final stroke erased the last word, the spectral form of Rapunzel materialized, no longer beautiful, but a grotesque thing of matted hair and grasping bone, her mouth open in an endless silent scream before she exploded into a storm of burning strands. though the kingdom still tells the pretty fairy tale of rescue princesses and true love's kiss. Those who know the truth avoid the tower ruins after dark. They remember the boys who died with golden hair growing from their throats, and the girls who barely escaped with their lives. And on certain nights when the wind blows from the east, you can still hear it, the faint sound of a hairbrush moving through endless strands, and a voice humming a lullaby that isn't meant for human ears. If tonight's story stayed with you, become part of the Pink Collective by liking, commenting, and subscribing. Until next time, Pink Collective, stay curious, stay safe, and stay pink.